Hello and welcome to the pod. I'm Nathan Fink.
I'm Jasmine Torres-Allen, and this is New Hampshire Family Now,
A show about building family in the Granite State. Today in the show, Jasmine and I recover from the ride together and then talk time in. And later, founder of Own Beat Athlete, Susan Stout, joins the show to discuss more nurturing sporting environments and the opportunity to bring out the best in our children. New Hampshire Family Now is brought to you by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Since 1962, the Charitable Foundation has worked hand in hand with generous and visionary citizens to maximize the power of giving and support, collaborate, and lead innovative initiatives. Initiatives like New Hampshire Tomorrow, which is focused on making sure children and families have access to education, healthcare, and career pathways to ensure every family member thrives. To learn more about New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and all their initiatives, go to www.nhcf.org. This podcast was also brought to you by Family Support New Hampshire. Family Support New Hampshire is NH's coalition of family resource centers and family strengthening programs that exist to ensure Granite State families have access to resources so both caregivers and children can succeed, because supported families are strong families. To find a family resource center near you, visit www.fsnh.org. Benicio del Toro,
amazing.
Then there's JT, and I'm like, okay, you brought sexy back. Okay. So,
welcome to the podcast, everybody. It's Jasmine and Nathan.
It's the driver's seat, isn't it?
Yes, it makes me nervous.
How you been? What have you been up to?
I have been really busy with Day of the Dead stuff, and we just had an amazing event this week out in Nashua at the Nashua Public Library, and we had 45 kids come, and lots of families participate, and they learned about the Day of the Dead, and those events that just I love being in community because everybody's just happy to be together.
Yeah, super exciting.
Yeah. What about you? Ride for Resilience. Right?
Oh my gosh, I have so much to say about this. So first of all, okay, so I did ride, and the whole Ride for Resilience, what we were doing is we were riding this 103-mile loop throughout the Lakes region, connecting family resource centers as we went.
That's wild.
It's wild. We started at Whole Village in Plymouth, then down to Lakes Region Community Services in Laconia, over to Archways in Tilton, and then Archways in Franklin, and then circled the globe back, it felt like.
That's a long way to ride.
Yeah, it is. Mile 50, everything started to cramp up. And that's where all of a sudden, like, that really deep resilience self-conversation came into play, because, I think as a product of my privilege, I'm a white male somewhere in his 40s. So I started to think about, 55 miles, I hit this wall. I have like 60 to go. Ooh. Right? I don't know when how long that's going to take. I am literally pedal stroke by pedal stroke.
So what's the conversation in your head when you get to that wall? What's the thing that you're telling yourself? Okay, I've got 60 miles left to go.
So I used to think, I'll tell you what I used to think resilience was. I used to think resilience was when you dug deep and you powered through. But what happens when there's nothing left? There's no power left. So all of a sudden, I started to look for spaces where I had something left. The way I was even thinking about each pedal stroke, at first I was pushing down, and then all of a sudden I was lifting up.
So would you say that the support that you had filled in some of those spaces? Because we talk about how, having those supports really builds up that resiliency.
It's true. And this is where it became kind of, running into what was my perception of support prior. And then I started to also think about help seeking and stigma, because I was lucky enough to ride with this amazing woman next to me, Laura Hagley, who works at Valley Regional Hospital. And she is a elite athlete.
Holy moly.
And so there was this thing that was happening where she was noticing that I was crashing, and she was like, "You okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm great." And she was like, "You sure?" And I wasn't great, and she would be offering me, she's like, "Do you want a snack? Do you want this? You need to eat something." And for some reason, I was constantly, "No, I got this. No, I got this." But inside, I didn't have any of it. So it was kind of like that conflation of being under a lot of like physical stress, which I know is totally different than the stressors that I'm alluding to.
Life, yes.
Yeah. But this ride, it changed something foundationally in me, because there's something about the way that my perspective fell apart. It crumbled because I was like so excited, like this is going to be, I didn't think easy, but I didn't think it was going to be this difficult.
Yes.
And if there's one thing that I want to be our organization to be, it's purveyors of hope.
Yeah. And your Ride for Resilience kind of reminds me of like, when someone is homeless or like on the verge of homelessness and all they can think about is the level of stress that they're under. And then when they finally have that like job that is going to provide them that stability or, be able to get a home and stuff like that. And then finally there's like room for those little bits of hope.
All I can say is I am so grateful that I wrote it. We're going to do it again next year. In fact, you can still donate. If you go to NewHampshireChildren'sTrust.org on our homepage, you can see a little thing there. So thanks for asking. That's like the longest I've ever actually told you something. I've been trying to like hide my life and just been like, what's Jasmine doing?
Yeah, it's so easy to do that. But sometimes you got to turn the tables.
Yeah. So what are you doing? What are you learning about?
Oh, okay. So in my Jasmine Learned Something, and I'll tell a personal story with my son, which is, we're trying to figure out a different method of timeout.
Ooh.
The tried and true method of discipline of timeout, right? We always lean on that one. It's the one we know the most, right? And for the first time ever, the pediatrician was like, how about you try something else? And I was like,
it wasn't working.
It wasn't working. Timeout wasn't working for us. He wasn't learning. He was still, doing some of the same typical behaviors that, a child might be acting out. And timeout just wasn't working.
So let me ask you, how did you know, though, that it was definitively not working?
If it's the behaviors being repetitive, they're, timeout just seems like kind of like a break for them.
Yeah.
You can kind of visually see and you can kind of and hear that timeout's not really working. And so we were like, all right, so what do we do? Like other than timeout? Because timeout worked for my daughter, but timeout didn't work for my son. And so I talked to my pediatrician and she was like, it's time to try something different. And I said, what do you recommend? And she said, well, have you tried spending even more time together? And I said, ooh,
time in.
Interesting, right? Time in, and she did explain to us that, spending more time together as a family screen free could really open up the door to the bigger emotions as to why timeout might not work, and it'll give your child some time to be able to see, how to work out problems in the family unit, going back to that community within the home.
Right.
And you can model certain behaviors for your kids when you're together. But the biggest thing is she's like, have you tried hugging and cuddling more?
That is really interesting because I have been thinking about this with my oldest son who, when we run into an issue, is it push away or pull closer, pull in? Mm-hmm. And there is something that melts when we go in.
Yes. And so, in my Jasmine Learned Something kind of way, I did some digging onto, hugs and how hugs are beneficial for our nervous system and how it helps ground people and that it's beneficial for the caregiver and the receiver to hug in moments of stress. And it just helps elevate and lower the blood pressure and kind of like lowers the stakes between you and your child a little bit more.
I mean, it makes total sense. Even hearkening back to the Ride for Resilience, the only reason I made that is because I was near someone with someone experiencing something alongside. Mm-hmm. That's the only reason I made it. Had I been alone, there is no possible way.
And COVID has only exacerbated our apartness, right? Our ability to be away and not touching and 6 feet. And while that encouraged a lot of like good things for people who might not be touchy-feely, but they even say even hugging yourself helps your nervous system. So if you're not a touchy-feely person, but you take the time to possibly, like a weighted blanket, right? You have something that gives you that sort of like, I'm here, I'm present in the moment. And that hug kind of gives you that opportunity.
If you're not careful, Temple Grandin is going to send a cease and desist letter. And when we come back, I welcome Susan Stout. Don't go anywhere. Today's episode was brought to you by Upreach Therapeutic Equestrian Center. Located in Goffstown, New Hampshire, Upreach partners with the power of horse to create strong children, strong families, and strong communities. To learn more about Upreach Therapeutic Equestrian Center and its many inspirational programs, visit upreachtec.org. That's upreachtec.org.
Today's show was also brought to you by Burgoo Media, a full-service media company dedicated
dedicated to helping nonprofits realize impact stories for print, video, social, and legacy media, and more. Both budget-conscious and grant-friendly, Ergo Media helps your organization celebrate the humans in human services. Learn more at ergomedia.com. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. For the second half of the show, I'm thrilled to welcome Susan Stout, founder of Own Beat Athlete, an organization dedicated to bringing out the best in our young athletes, especially those who are quote unquote wired differently. Susan, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Now, you have been and are many things in your own life, including a junior national level athlete, a lawyer, a mom, and an educator. What drove you to found this particular organization, Own Beat Athlete?
It was a collision of my roles as a sports parent to my son, and then reflecting back many years ago when I was a swim coach. And my son, was struggling with things related to ADHD, dyslexia, learning differences. And I was watching him struggle in sports, even though he was a talented athlete, all he wanted to do. And especially as he got, a little bit older than the initial levels, it really became a challenge. And I found myself frustrated with the coaches sometimes for not getting it. And then I was looking back to when I was a young coach and thinking, oh my goodness, I didn't know. I made the same mistakes. I, looked at the kid in lane 4 who was hanging on the lane line and, thought it was intentional disobedience or whatever. And why isn't this kid getting the directions? And so I really wanted to help 3 groups. I mean, the primary is to help the kids, right? And the way to do that, I thought, is through helping the coaches. And it also makes their job more enjoyable, easier, less frustrating. They can be better coaches. And then also the parents, who are often the ones who, like I did, are seeing it. They see the big picture. They know their kid and are trying to facilitate this and support their kid. And so sort of help them know you're not alone. This is, it's a real issue. And there's something that it's not easy. Like I don't pretend it's easy, but there's something that you can do about it.
Yeah. Now, this is all kind of cast over this idea that sports, in fact, does present a good learning opportunity. And, I think back to my own life as a former athlete, though I did just ride that 103 miles. So former athlete, but I think of sports as a place where I came to terms with certain things. So I wanted to start there first. What is it about sports that presents a good and fruitful learning opportunity for our young children?
Well, I think for all kids, and that's where I start with it. And frankly, where I end up a lot of times is that what I'm talking about is good for all kids. And there's a movement right now of alarm, actually, among the sports people in sports leadership saying, gosh, kids are dropping out of sports. They're not participating in sports as much. And it is a concern because they can provide such a learning opportunity beyond, you start with sort of the physical, it's great to be out there and that's important. It's more important than just getting the physical health. It also, for all kids, and especially for what I call the differently wired kids, it prepares their brain and body to be able to learn because they are in a space. It's sort of a natural antidote to anxiety or to not being able to focus, and sort of prepares them to be in a position to learn and to take in experiences and relate better to both the adults and the peers. Then all of those lessons, and again, especially these kids, but all kids, I mean, it's pretty sort of artificial to be sitting in a classroom or, the way that we have kids learn today is not as dynamic or natural. And when you're in sports and you are naturally having these both social and, practical interactions with your peers, and you're able to learn in a way from a role model. Oftentimes, it's not your parent, it's not your teacher telling you what to do. A lot of kids do learn a lot from their coaches, and you have a real opportunity to model, teamwork and resilience and, all of these things that we're wanting our kids to learn, but in a setting where they don't feel like they're being lectured. The hitch there is, and part of the reason for my work is that coaching and that learning opportunity can go both ways. If it's a positive experience, you can walk away with it with a lot of, you're learning how to set goals, you're learning how to plan, you're learning how to be a good teammate. And it really can boost both practical skills and confidence. If you're in a circumstance where you're not feeling supported or where the coaching isn't as skilled, it can really tear a kid down. So you've the role model, and we've all seen both, right? The coach that you want to be just like, and the coach that you really don't want your kid to emulate. So that's again, one of the main purposes of my work.
Yeah, and we're seeing that on Saturdays, opposing coaches. We're in the soccer season right now, and I'm so glad you mentioned the idea of this sports alarm going off saying kids are dropping out, because my wife and I have had that very same conversation. Is this worth it for us, given our struggles and being on the sideline, and that we have a child that is quote unquote wired differently, and he has ADHD? We're very open about that, as is he. So I wanted to kind of jump in through that perspective of how we know our kids are wired differently, because if I'm honest, as a parent, I think I'm predisposed to not notice that my child is exhibiting specific behaviors that would put him in that category, wired differently. So when we look at our children and how they're behaving in these circumstances, what should we be looking for to note that they might need a higher level of attention or a different coaching approach?
I want to take that sort of in two parts. The first, just to make sure everyone's sort of understanding what we're talking about when we say wired differently. And the technical term would be neurodivergent. I use wired differently both to sort of make it more relatable and also to broaden a little bit. My work has specifically, if looking at what I write about, is focused on ADHD, learning differences, and anxiety. But really, wired differently or being neurodivergent is really any child or athlete whose brain causes them, the way that their brain is set up, causes them to interact and experience the world in what we would consider non-typical way, and not what we would expect, and not the way that we would understand it, which is important. So the adults and coaches, parents in the child's world often do miss the signs, because they see the behavior and it doesn't compute with how they would behave with their more typical brain. I do think it's important. Another reason I use that term is labels can be useful. They can be useful in terms of getting the right medical care. They can be useful in terms of getting school accommodations. Outside of that, I think they can also be detrimental, right. Putting kids in a particular box. And these symptoms overlap various, what we would call diagnoses. So you might have a kid who has ADHD, dyslexia, and three separate kids, ADHD, dyslexia, and anxiety, and they all might exhibit some of the same symptoms. So either be it a shutdown or be it extra sensitivity or, an inability to pay attention can be based on anything. If you're any of those, if you're worrying about something because you're super anxious, you can't pay attention. If you have ADHD, you can't pay attention for a different reason. But what matters is sort of how these things present. And again, as you say, it's not always the stereotype. People say, oh, you have a kid with ADHD. Oh, he just can't sit still. There's so much more to it. And a lot of the things that are related to this different wiring, different way of experiencing the world are things that look very intentional or lazy. Looks like lazy, looks like unmotivated, looks like, intentionally goofing off, when really what's driving behind it could be, an anxious fear. It could be that they are not comfortable in the big arena because, there's lots of stimuli around. You also start to see kids who they don't plan well. They can't set a goal and follow through. They can't think at 6 o'clock at night. And so when you're trying to give them directions, they're looking off, the other way and start messing with somebody because, all of a sudden they're bored. A lot of these things that look different from how we typically view ADHD. And again, the important thing is that it looks to the coach and it looks to the parent like this kid doesn't care. This kid isn't trying. As you say, why are we even doing this? We're forcing our kid to go to practice. Avoidance is another one. This is scary. This is hard. I don't want to do it. Another one that people often don't recognize is emotional dysregulation and sensitivity, that, a kid might very often the executive functioning skills, which is sort of the planning center of the brain, the thing that allows for self-control. It allows for planning in advance, for setting a goal and sticking with it, for getting through your day, remembering your uniform, all of those things, those lag with kids with neurodivergent tendencies in their brain. Some of these kids can be 3 or 4 years behind in this control center. And so you will see kids have an immature reaction to, I missed my penalty kick and I'm falling apart. Well, wait, you're 12 years old. Why are you falling apart, more than another kid when you missed your penalty kick? That's actually a symptom of their different wiring. And so all of these things that look like just frustrating and annoying to a coach, if the coach can understand. Again, it doesn't make it easy, but if the coach can understand and the parents can understand where that comes from, then you can take a more productive approach to helping to solve the problem.
It strikes me that, when we're talking about this, we're actually talking about creating more nurturing spaces and environments where children can exercise their resilience quotient, right? Like any kid obviously is going to benefit from this approach. But for my child, for those children that have, are wired differently, what is a more conducive approach to sports and coaching then look like in practice?
It flows from what I said about understanding that, the most important thing is, and this is the background to the coaching approach, but is to get to know every kid really well. Know what they like to do off the field. Know, how they've interacted before, to talk to the kid, talk to the parents. That can get a little tricky depending on the age of the athlete. At a young age, parents will be very involved and might be saying, my kid struggles with ADHD. My kid struggles on Friday afternoons, whatever. As the kid gets older, that becomes their story to tell. And it also provides, another great learning opportunity for kids to self-advocate and be like, this is who I am. But I really put the onus on the coach to get to know those kids before something happens. And so then when you've got a kid who has forgotten his uniform and is freaking out about it and is, acting in a way that wouldn't otherwise make sense to you, then you know where you're starting. But I look at it as sort of a proactive and then a reactive shift in coaching. Proactively, and again, these things benefit all kids, but and so it's not like you have to run 2 different programs or be single. And the worst thing to do is single kids out, especially in a negative way. But, when practice starts, have the kids all run for a while or start a drill right away, get everybody sort of moving. A lot of times these kids respond really well to having a special job. Will you please help me set up the cones? Will you do, so they feel engaged. They've got to focus. Maybe when you're talking, they need to be allowed to play with the ball, fidget. And then for all kids, keep your speeches short. Don't sit there and lecture, keep people moving. And another thing that can be really helpful is to let kids know what to expect. So have some consistency, have a routine. This is what we do at the beginning of practice. This is what we do in the middle. If you've got a workout the kids need to know or steps that they need to remember, working memory is often difficult for these kids, again, for any of the reasons. And that's something that can look really annoying to a coach. I just told you the play. Why were you not listening? They might have been listening. They might have heard it, but they can't remember it. So write it down or have a signal or, have a different way to help them to remember without having to admit that they forgot. Because the last thing you want to do is single the kid out. And that also holds for when something goes off the rails. If you have a circumstance, kid doesn't follow directions, doesn't remember the play, doesn't have his shoes. First of all, wait. I think the most valuable thing and the hardest thing, I would say this for coaching and parenting, is the pause. You feel like, I got to address this right away. First of all, because I'm really mad. And second of all, because otherwise the kid will think I'm not on it. Wait a minute. Let the kid cool down. Their prefrontal cortex is, not caught up with their angst. And so the prefrontal cortex being the part that brings the control center back online. That they can reason, they can ration. Talking to a child who's in the spun up state, they can't even hear you. So just wait, even if you have to wait till the next day or wait till after practice, and then always address it in private. Yelling at a kid across the court, what the heck are you thinking, is not going to solve anything. It's gonna fracture the relationship, the situation, and frankly, the tone of the whole team.
Right.
While you don't have to make special, in most cases, you don't have to make a special plan or do a special thing. It's just good coaching. If you do have to do something, maybe there's a kid who always has to go first because otherwise he can't listen. The other kids get it. They get it. They get it much more than adults do if it's done in the right way. So I think all of those things, it's on the front end, prep to try to avoid these things. You won't avoid them altogether. And then remind yourself, the pause is as much for you as for the kid, right? To remember, okay, this is where this is coming from, and this is the most productive way to address it. And a lot of these kids also are very sensitive to sort of loud or busy, or so to the extent that you can talk in a calm voice, quiet voice, conversationally, a screaming coach is just throwing fuel on the fire.
I have to say that I'm so grateful for all the coaches out there because I, have the opportunity to volunteer, time being a, precious resource at this point. I haven't. And so I'm grateful for all that they do, the corralling, the instructing, and the cheering that goes on. And I suppose I want to know, is there a way for me, being the parent, to communicate my child's needs to that coach? And, maybe even should I do that?
Yeah, that's a great and tricky question. And I share with you again, I was a coach. I have tons of friends who are coaches, both, some of them are career coaches and others are volunteers. And I do this not at all to put them down. It's a really hard and often volunteer job. And really what I'm trying to do is boost them up and help, because I know I was in that same spot. As a parent, it is tricky because you have to walk that line between, well, I want to give as much information, but I also don't want to put a big target on my kid, before the season starts, as this is going to be hard. I think you have to read the coach. You have to read your kid. Some kids are very open about it, and some kids really don't want anyone to know. Yeah. And it's important to respect that in your kid. I sometimes, if you don't want to talk about my kid has ADHD or my kid this, sometimes the thing to do is just establish a nice relationship with a coach. Try to be, I'm not one who particularly loves to sit and watch practice, and I don't think it's always the best thing to do. But maybe do that a little, be involved, establish nice rapport with the coach, and then you can talk about things in a way that doesn't involve a diagnosis or a specific thing. My kid really responds well to this. My kid really needs to run around a few times before he starts practice, or the feedback can be helpful. In a situation, say, my kid is really avoiding practice. What do you think that's about? Yeah,
I think that it's interesting. There's a strength-based way to do that. You know what I mean? My son has a ton of energy. I wish I could bottle it, right? In making somebody aware of how advantageous that is.
That's the other thing that I really promote with coaches. I call them the superpowers. That yes, you've got these things that you can look at as drawbacks and difficulties. There are some really great athletes who have ADHD, and they will tell you they're great not in spite of, but because of their ADHD. That, again, I don't see the world this way, but the real definition of attention, it's not really a deficit. It's really that they're paying attention to everything and they can't figure out the most important things. So you're on the basketball court, you can see everything. And so there can be a real benefit to it. And some of these kids who, they can hyper focus on something. You look Michael Phelps, Simone Biles,
Ray Allen.
Yeah, who work with this. And so I think that's another thing to highlight for coaches is these kids can be an asset. These, they can, because coaches at the end of the day, unless they're, just especially at the youngest level, they want to win. And so say my kid can be a real asset to your team, not someone, this is not a charity case issue.
I, want to pick up on that because I want to be an asset to my son's career, his education. But as a parent, I know that I have a textured relationship with sports. This was a place where I went to discover and find myself. So do you have any advice for parents out there about making sure that we manage our own emotions or expectations and how to do that so that the environment we're creating is positive and nurturing?
Yeah, I think that it's hard. it's hard for a lot of parents because a lot of parents were athletes, or some who weren't see that their kids are, and they want to sort of live that. And it can be so frustrating to know that your kid has potential or talent or whatever those words mean, and seem unable to tap it, and also unable to enjoy it. So that can be fraught for a lot of parents, and again, fraught for parents of neurotypical and atypical kids. I think the awareness like you have, I mean, it can be rare, but it's really the first step is like, hey, this is hard for me. Like I need to step back from being this involved or being there. But the other thing that I note is, even though, yes, it's sports, and yes, you want to win. And, I was an athlete and as competitive as the rest, but really for my kid, I want him to have fun and have a good experience. And if you can give yourself a few almost rules, like taglines, like I only say to my son after sporting events, did you have fun? That's all I say. If he wants to talk about the game, I will listen, but I don't ask. And I say, when he goes off, I might say good luck, but mostly I say have fun. And I also, the other thing that I say, I read this in a book and just thought it was brilliant, was I had fun watching you. Nothing to do with whether they won, they lost. I say that after every game. And so if you can sort of be aware, like, oh, this is a slippery slope for me, and set yourself some boundaries, like this is how I want to talk about it. I think that's what I usually advise.
Now, if people want to learn more about you and your work, where can they go?
My website, which is ownbeatathlete.com, spelled out.
Well, Susan, I so appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate the advice. Thank you for being here. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. It was fun.
This podcast was brought to you by Nixon Peabody, who delivers exceptional legal services for clients in the community by combining high performance, an entrepreneurial spirit, deep engagement, and an unwavering commitment to a culture of collaboration, diversity, and humanity. Nixon Peabody works with universities, hospitals, and nonprofits of every size to maximize impact. For more information, visit nixonpeabody.com. Many thanks to the Samuel P. Hunt Foundation for sponsoring this podcast. Established in 1951, Samuel P. Hunt Foundation is a Manchester-based, independent nonprofit that provides grants primarily for the arts, children and youth services, faith-based organizations, educational institutions, healthcare, and human services. New Hampshire Family Now is listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and more. Listen wherever you get your podcasts, or ask your smart speaker to play New Hampshire Family Now.